incredibly pathetic from Gavin Newsom.
Don't uphold the principle. If you don't uphold the principle, I'm going to call you out for not upholding the principle. On his epitaph, it will read 45th and 47th Presidents of the United States. He said a lot of shit.
Sanctuary jurisdictions have lower crime rates. You move to a state that has higher insurance rate, higher car insurance, not just home insurance, has higher property taxes, many of these red states.
And I think that we should start from a position in the United States.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't care.
Shapiro, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I love it. All the way from Florida. We'll get to that in a moment.
Hey, you seem a little bit spicy about it.
Yeah,
a little salty.
Well, Texas, that would have been more spicy. But especially, come on, you're a Hollywood kid, at least Hollywood adjacent. You're a Burbank kid.
Born and bred in born in St. Joe's in Burbank.
I love that.
And
what year? 1984. And you went. And it's interesting because you were sort of middle class family. Grew up, and I got a new book we're going to get to in a moment.
Okay. So it's a book deal. This is a book deal. That's why. All right, that makes sense.
But in that, you talk about your home, where I think 6 members of your family living in a 2-bedroom home, 1 bathroom.
Yep.
Burbank, California, and you describe it, at least briefly, as pretty bucolic, huh?
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I mean, Burbank was a great place to grow up. It was like kids playing in the street, and I had the greatest privilege of all, right? I'm an American, growing up in the greatest country in the history of the world, and I've got a 2-parent household. My parents love each other, and they take care of us, and they're able to make a middle-class income. My mom started off as a secretary and worked her way up to become vice president of a small film and TV company. My dad came out here to be a composer, and he ended up playing piano at a restaurant on Ventura Boulevard, I believe. It was in, it was in across from University. So you're right. My first book came out when I was 20. It was sort of an expose of leftism on college campuses. I think some might say it was a little ahead of its time. And then I went to Harvard Law School at 20, and I wrote a couple of more books while I was at Harvard Law. And when I came out, I came back to LA, and I practiced at a real estate firm or real estate wing of.
It's genuinely like this is going to be the issue with Gavin Newsom. He's going to do the same shit of trying to appeal to moderates, the moderate centrists that don't exist, by having people like Ben Shapiro, who is a Nazi, on his show. Like, Ben Shapiro is an evil human being.
Of a major law firm called.
And this is so fucking disgusting.
Goodwin Proctor. I practiced there. I last
score. Did that take
That's
shape?
pretty combative.
Was out and about in Southern California, and you took a job there, working at Breitbart.
That had been in 2012. There were governors and localities working with ICE. California is a sanctuary state, which makes it much more difficult for local law enforcement to hand over information to ICE about deportation status.
God, I fucking hate Gavin Newsom.
That wouldn't best policy, you're pragmatic, you talk about your pragmatism all the time, wouldn't best policy be to cooperate with ICE in the vast majority of cases? So instead of ICE going to, as you say, hospitals and churches to pick people up, they'd be going to jailhouses to pick people up.
That's exactly what they do in California, and we have over 10,000 that I've cooperated with since I've been governor of California. We work very directly with ICE as it relates to CDCR, our state prison. California has cooperated with more ICE transfers probably than any other state in the country, and I vetoed multiple pieces of legislation that have come from my legislature to stop the ability for the state of California to do that. So when it comes to the issues of violent criminals, when it comes to felons, people
pathetic, absolutely pathetic,
from the largest state system in the United States of America,
not calling out ICE for any of its violence.
Cooperates with ICE.
Okay, but why is it then? What makes it a sanctuary state?
The broader sanctuary policies that are established, and we had a policy that was established under Governor Brown, SB 54. You have city sanctuary policies that go back quite literally to the time Ronald Reagan was governor, and it relates to some of the issues in Central America, sort of the origin stories. But at bottom line, it relates to those policies, this notion that federal law should be enforced by federal law enforcement agencies, that we should not consign local law enforcement to federal responsibilities and prioritization.
Right, but shouldn't the state step in with localities and tell localities that they ought to cooperate better with ICE, thus to facilitate it?
Well, I have sort of Rudy Giuliani's point of view, who made the point as an advocate for sanctuary policy when he was mayor of New York. He said it keeps people safer, healthier, and more educated. Safer in the context that it allows community members to be more likely to participate as witnesses of crime or victims of crime in going after the perpetrators, more likely to get an immunization shot if they're not worried about the nurse turning them over to ICE, more likely to go to school and get educated if they're not worried about the school crossing guard crossing them and ultimately turning them over to ICE. So it's the tool of pragmatism because of the complete abject failure of the federal government. A sanctuary policy is unnecessary if we had comprehensive immigration reform.
Or we
and
could
had a
just
federal
like say, sorry, get out of our state.
response that was adequate to the task. But in the absence,
Working with ICE
it's
at any
from-
degree is
from
so
the
fucking
70s and
like
80s and
pathetic.
90s, 2000s, and obviously I got here as governor, and we had an established framework before I got here.
But
SB
it
54.
is true that sanctuary policy obviously has had a massive impact as a driver of tremendous number of illegal immigrants in the state of California.
I don't know about that. I mean, you see in a lot of states that don't have sanctuary policies, huge increase in immigration, illegal immigration, massive increases, even far greater than the state of California. Just look as
But
an
in terms of
example.
the cost structure, I mean, you recently, for example, had to freeze the enrollment of undocumented immigrants in state health systems
Yeah.
to save money, right? I mean,
Completely
these
fucking
immigrants were-
pathetic, by the way. Absolutely fucking. Oh my god.
No.
That's a separate issue. There are 12 states that provide health care for undocs, and we believe in universal health care regardless of pre-existing conditions.
My
or
only
bill
point is that the
effect.
cost structure is extraordinarily burdensome.
But I don't think it's in unpacking it. I don't think it's the sanctuary policies that are driving that. And I'll give you a proof point. Florida doesn't have sanctuary policy. Huge increase in undocumented community. Huge increase in Texas. It's not a driver. Their sanctuary policies. They don't have sanctuary policies in those states. The state of California's policies.
And
I
Ben
don't
knows
think-
this, by the way. Ben absolutely knows this. He's just gonna lie about it, and he's not gonna admit that Gavin could be right.
In that respect, have invited people into our state.
God, I'm a little
And
fucking
I
tired
use
today.
those as, I think, proof points of that. And that's a different. So the notion of how do you deal with people that are here 10, 15 years? How do you deal with mixed status families in
I'm
the
gonna
state?
do
And
this
how do
real
you
fast.
provide for health care as opposed to emergency care and stabilize populations and community health? It's a different approach. It's one that we've been very transparent about. It's one that's hardly unique because in every state they provide compensated care for undocs at the emergency room. Many states provide it for children, many for seniors. California provides
As they
it across the
should.
board.
I mean, the biggest problem, though, as somebody who left the state, is that the cost structure in the state has become so burdensome, not just because of illegal immigration, but generally. And so the idea that policy has no impact as a magnet for particular human behavior or alienating people from a state, that's clearly untrue.
Yeah,
and when you
well-
look at the homeless population, for example, friendlier policies toward providing services in Santa Monica led
Separate
to...
point, though. But now
Yes.
you're getting a homeless policy, not immigration policy.
No, but,
let's-
but
I
if we
want
want to
to
stick
back
with
up.
immigration policy,
No, I wanna
if you make
let's-
it easier for illegal immigrants
let's stick with
not
immigration
to avoid
policy.
ICE, then presumably...
No, look, I appreciate that. So we've established important. I appreciate the question because I'm glad we've established that we do cooperate with ICE in California. In particular, this governor, who's, as I said, on multiple occasions, vetoed efforts to stop me from that coordination for dangerous criminals, and we've done that over 10,000 folks.
So it'd be
no-
wrong for... So when AOC said this week that I should...
We need to stop like framing that ICE could be even doing anything like positive, saying to help with dangerous criminals. Like it's an abstraction of how evil ICE actually is at its root, and basically saying like, oh, they could be doing good, but they're not. No, they are designed to do only evil.
should be abolished. You disagree?
Oh, I disagree. When I think a candidate for president by the name of Harris said that in the last campaign, I came out. I remember being on Chris Hayes hours later saying I think that's a mistake. So absolutely. Number two, as it relates to the issue of sanctuary policy, I think it's important to establish because it's not well established. Sanctuary jurisdictions have lower crime rates than non-sanctuary jurisdictions. So this notion that it somehow increases crime is also, I think, contradicted on the basis of the facts. So this notion that population it becomes an attractive.
Get ready for Ben to
nature
completely
of population
sidestep
increases,
this
I think,
point.
is contradicted by the facts. As it relates to crime, it's contradicted by the facts. But there's unquestionably, and you're right about this, as it relates to an expansion of services, but not just for sanctuary jurisdictions, for population, diverse populations. Yes, there are states like California that have chosen a different approach.
And that approach, I mean, means that when you came into office, for example, the budget was, what, $200 billion? And your proposed budget last year or this year is $350 billion. You went from surplus
240. The general fund's $248 billion. We have $42.3 billion additional revenue structure than we anticipated. By the way, another 2.8 came in December. And California is now replenishing its reserves, $23 billion, paying down pension obligations, $11.8 billion. There's no question there are cost pressures as it relates to Medicaid, and Medi-Cal in California. And those pressures are going to be made worse because of the big, beautiful bill.
Well, I mean, I think that the main pressures in the state of California in terms of kind of future costs looks like some of the programs that you mentioned, mainly, if we're going to look at it, CalPERS, CalSTARS, the fact that you have perhaps $500 billion in unfunded liabilities going forward.
Well, which we've substantially improved in the last 7 years. I just mentioned the $11.8 billion commitment.
Here's a good way to
state
fix the economy here in California, right? Tax hikes for people who make a lot of money. But Gavin Newsom will never do that. Also, fixing the housing system, like completely redistributing like how housing is way works, so we can have like multifunctional buildings, especially in cities, because you're building constantly these drier and drier areas. You're gonna lead to worse and worse fire, like the Palisades fire. Was that last year? Or was that 2 years ago? 2 years ago.
To pay down long-term pension obligations. STRS and PERS,
No, it was
their
last year,
funded
wasn't it?
liability has been improving over the last 5 or 6 years. Going to make up for the last 30 years. You may recall a decade plus ago, we did reforms for new employees moving in. We dealt with spiking and other issues and abuses in that space. We're hardly unique in this country as it relates to unfunded liability.
Or fraud issues, obviously.
And fraud issues. We can talk about fraud all day. I'd love to talk about that, and we could get back to that because I think it's an incredibly important topic. And California's been
Ooh.
actually out front on a lot of these anti-fraud efforts, and I think there's a lot of BS in this space as it relates to sort of targeted assaults and offense that obviously are pain our politics. But I want to go back because we're going to get all this. I know everyone came here for all this stuff.
Of course. Before we do, I just want to ask, there's sort of a general take that I have, and that is, I heard the podcast that you did with Ezra Klein. I think Ezra's wonderful. He and I disagree about nearly everything, and I think Ezra's really, really fascinating person with a lot of really interesting and heterodox ideas. And he talked with you a lot about sort of governance, and you talked with him a lot about how you were trying to remove regulatory barriers to, for example, building units, right? Because when you came into office, you wanted to build, I believe it was 3.5 million units.
That was the stated need,
right?
And then we created a legal framework of 2.5 million,
and it will come up way
under
short of that. By it's like 2030. What is it? About 150,000 units that are being created.
Little less than 150,000. You're right, about 111, 108,000.
And this isn't a rip on you. I mean, because
it's been a major national issue. And the macroeconomics of this, with interest rate environment, sort of post-COVID environment, made this housing crisis across the country.
Although to be fair, the housing crisis in California is particularly bad. I mean, there are places like Phoenix or Austin or there's
the original. I said yesterday or last week in the States, the original sin, our inability to get out of our own way on all the regulatory thickets.
Right. So
we blew through those in the last couple of years. 61 housing reform bills we just passed.
We could just also make it so landowners and apartment owners are owned by the state. We eat all of that, and we have multi-purpose buildings with housing and like, what am I looking for the word? Like imagine living in an apartment in like San Francisco. You walk downstairs and then there's stores or little shops, and then you walk outside of that area and then you're in like a little community hub.
And Ezra was highlighting that. Interesting. Yes. New York just moved in a direction. I think finally we Democrats broadly are moving now finally in the right damn direction after decades and decades. Democrats and Republicans in California neglecting this space.
Right. And I think that one of the problems that people see, and there's been a big question. You've talked about it a lot actually, about the frustration that people have with politics and the disenchantment that people have and the feeling that no matter what they do, they can't get ahead. And that's manifesting in a lot of political polarization. And this gets you, I think, a sort of broader issue. It's not just you, so I don't mean this to be a specific critique of you. I think it's a critique of a lot of politicians that I have left and right. Yep. And that is, you look at the system, you realize as the governor how complex the system is, how difficult it is to get things done, how much gridlock there.
Like, bird's eye view, LA. Oh, I just saw a really good image that I wanted. Bird's eye view, LA. Bird's eye view, Madrid. Open an image, a new tab. Is that LA? Yeah. Well, granted, this image is in 2017, so let me... Like, here's a bird's eye view of LA. You have so many roads, cross sections. Barely a minority of this is housing. A lot of this is office spaces. A lot of it's empty office spaces on top of that, and like business spaces. No, a couple of these are like hospitals as well. But then look at this. You have, yes, these business spaces and office spaces, but you have these like little pockets of just community right here. The little spaces, little green areas. Yeah, you have roads, but it's not as fucking destructive to the community as this. Granted, different sized cities, and then you have some of the skyscrapers back there, but the nature of these multi-use buildings where there's businesses inside of here, houses inside of here, where it's not just like one or the other. Little communities in every little corner, little pocket, and you can't have that in a system like this.
there is in the system. But politicians, in order
And now that we have stricter regulations on multi-use buildings, multi-use buildings, I'm looking for housing and business name for construction. Whatever. Anyways, multi-use buildings, we're going to have housing and like economic forces in the same pocket where it doesn't get siphoned out of the city.
And make that change happen, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle. And it seems to me that that is a recipe for disaster for the American body politic. Because if you make promises that cannot be fulfilled, because the system does not allow for it to be fulfilled, people inherently end up frustrated. And I have relatives who still live in the state of California. I visit it routinely, and they're making a very good living. Right? I have a sister-in-law and brother-in-law who live in LA. They make a combined excellent living, and they're barely making their mortgage. And the housing costs are too high. The cost of living is too high. I believe the poverty rates in California on a cost-adjusted basis are some of the highest in the nation.
Right there with Florida, correct. When you look at the supplemental poverty index, when you look at poverty broadly defined, it's slightly above average. Supplemental, Florida and California, right
If you're looking at real estate costs in particular are extraordinary in the state of California. And as you say, you're trying to remove regulations, but the problem is that unless we are willing to recognize a fundamental reality, which is that the relationship of the American people with their government needs to change.
I agree with that.
And what that means is that we need to radically remove the regulatory structures that allow for more building, that we need to radically stop perverting markets when it comes to how we make housing policy.
And Ben, how would you like to do this? Would you like to do this in the sense of, like, this shows Ben as like a completely, I mean, Ben's very smart, but as a rational actor who has good interests. Like, this shows like, oh, they're equally, they're on the same page on stuff. No. Ben wants people to die and suffer.
We need to stop wasting money in taxpayer funding on things like, for example, a gigantic, you once called it boondoggle, high-speed rail that is going to cost in excess of $100 billion.
The high-speed rail. Criticizing high-speed rail. There we go. There's a conservative twist.
In this state. Right. The guarantee, and again, I see it rising on the populist right too, which is sort of a big government right, which is something I object to on a sort of classically conservative level. The promises that are made, that if you give government more power and more taxpayer revenue, that suddenly these problems are going to be alleviated. And the actual result, which is less ability to do what my parents did, to move from a 2-bedroom small house in Burbank to a 4-bedroom, slightly larger house in North Hollywood. And then for me to go to a great state school like UCLA. And then for me to go to Harvard Law School and now to have a really, really nice house. I did have a nice house in California before we left, obviously. Those obstacles need to be removed.
Well, you sound like me. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we get high-speed rail aside. You made my speech and my argument the last 3 years in terms of the housing reforms we pursued. Could not agree more. I highlighted the 61 bills just last year.
These 61 bills are like micro niche differences rather than actual like structural reform to the way that the housing market works in California.
And highlight the 42 CEQA reform bills, the original, talk about process and regulatory thickets, those environmental rules that were established ironically by Ronald Reagan himself when he was governor of California. So we've been in the process of doing precisely what you're suggesting we need to do, and we've been doing it very meaningfully and been nation-leading reforms in this space. Now, of course, the private sector needs to catch up in the context of interest rate environment becoming more favorable.
Housing needs to be decommodified, by the way. The government just needs to eat all housing markets.
We are cities and counties, we put on notice. You may recall when I first became governor, I sued Huntington Beach, the first city, because they were out of compliance with their housing element. We established a legally binding goal of 2.5 million units. We talked about the stretch goal, what needed to get some equilibrium in our prices, the supply-demand imbalance, but we created a legally binding goal of 2.5 million.
So what could be done to make that happen in not Huntington Beach, but LA, San Francisco?
We created a housing accountability unit. We pursued 46 actions. We've unlocked.
But I guess the question is from like the common man perspective, right? From my perspective, where I left, I took my business, right? From that perspective, how do we get to the material change? And if we cannot, then perhaps that requires a complete rethink. Now, come over to my classical libertarian economics here, Governor, is I guess what I'm saying, and maybe recognize that the amount of tax revenue that's taken in the state perverts the market incentives. That what's been generated in the state is a middle class that is really struggling. Vast social services for people who are at poverty line or below and slightly above, and then a group of people who are either so wealthy they don't care or so wealthy now they're leaving, right, because of the prospective wealth tax, which I know you oppose, right? You understand markets, so that's why I'm always a little bit bewildered when there measures taken by the state legislature that end up perverting markets in fairly serious ways.
Well, we can get into the crony capitalism, state capitalism, and the tithings from Nvidia and AMD and what's going on with Intel and what's happening with the Trump administration in that respect. But I agree with you broadly.
Also, Gavin Newsom hating on the wealth tax is really clear on like where his priorities stand with capital interest.
All this. I mean, the fact is we've been tackling all that. Can't make up for 50, 60 years. And you're talking about literally a 50-year trend line as it relates to the issues of cost of housing affordability. But I can talk in terms of the substantive actions we've taken, tripling their income tax credits for working families, creating a child tax credit, foster tax credit, doing more as it relates to pre-distribution opportunities.
Tax credits, those won Harris the election, by the way. Child tax credits, that won Harris the election.
Radically lowering the income tax rates in the
Well,
states.
California has tax. I mean, there's 16 states right now. Let's talk about those 16 states.
Why don't we talk about California? That's
well, I'm going to. They tax their low-wage earners more than California taxes its high-wage earners. Let's talk about lowering those tax rates in those 16 states. How about the middle class? 40% of the middle class in Texas pay higher taxes than they do in California. We have the highest tax rate for the 1%. But the overall tax burden, and there's been independent analysis after independent analysis, is marginally higher than the national average.
Okay.
So the tax rate for the 1%, you're in that bubble. But 99% empirically are
not.
As
a person who grew up in California and spent my entire career in California, I paid every single tax rate in the state of California. I started off making, when I first got out of school and I'd quit the law firm, I was making maybe 60 grand a year.
So you started out paying less than you would in a dozen plus other states.
And I didn't.
It's a progressive tax state.
I understand it's a progressive tax state. The problem is that when I left, I also took 80 employees.
Yeah.
And there's somebody who's got to pay the bills for those employees, and that's typically not the state. The person who is paying the bills for the employees, and the person.
That's the guy who's created. By the way, you're talking to a guy who started right out of college, pen to paper, and started 23 small businesses, literally.
With a significant amount of money supporting you. I'm trying to get to a certain part.
Or painting on the wall of FDR, and I look at him and I smile. And I said, "Oh, here's the third term." He goes, "What about 4 terms? Should I take him seriously?
Okay, so
should I take him literally?"
I will say,
I don't know. I'm just a question.
No, and my general
That's
answer.
the president.
And my general answer to this is, if we've watched Donald Trump for 10 years, and we're still doing the thing where we all take him explicitly literally, I think that
Maduro did.
So people
or has.
Okay, it turns out Maduro should have. But one of the things that I remember, I would get this critique about President Trump a lot, is President Trump, who, as I've said multiple times on his epitaph, it will read 45th and 47th presidents of the United States. He said a lot of shit. Like the thing I'm not going to.
I take my presidents a little more seriously.
I don't think you do. And this is the thing where I really doubt it. I see a lot of people who Trump will fire off a random tweet, and everybody kind of laughs because it's President Trump. If I'm going to pretend that is coming from the same thought process as whatever comes from Joe Biden's press office, which went through 7 layers and maybe not the president,
very different.
Then I'm not gonna pretend that's the same thing, because I'm not an idiot.
And by the way, I could not agree with more, and that's, I think, reflected in the humor I'm trying to put back in on my social media.
And actually, I think it's kind of a problem for you, because I think that, frankly, the stuff that you're doing is more thought out than the stuff that President Trump does. Meaning, I think that President Trump is
true. Actually, true. Trump does not think before he tweets.
Waking up at 3 a.m. if he went to sleep at all, and he's firing off stuff on Truth Social, right? And so am I supposed to take that as seriously as you, in a methodical fashion, saying, you know what, I'm going to prank him back? And I think that people people who are your supporters do take you in that way more literally than they would be apt to take President Trump.
A lot of my supporters have been offended by what we're trying to do, but no, look, and a lot, I think, appreciate the humor that we bring to it, and I do think I think it's reflected in I think a sense of agreement that we have in that respect as it relates to what Trump is saying.
But like, if you win the 2028 election, I will call you president of the United States, right? Because that election will be legitimate, and if it's J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or whoever else,
I was, as an American, I called.
Yeah. By the way, Ben Shapiro would absolutely support Newsom over Trump, because Shapiro understands that Newsom supports the same like right-leaning capital interest block of the Democrat Party that infected a lot of neocons as well.
Donald Trump, President of the United States, Mr. President. I mean, of course, and so I'm with you on that.
Yes.
But that doesn't suggest that I believe for a second, and you haven't respectfully convinced me that I'm wrong or errant, that he won't do everything in his power to manipulate the outcome. I think it's time of life. If he was 20 years younger, I absolutely believe he'd run for a third term. But at time of life suggests that that's not going to be the case. But I do think he's going to try to hardwire.
You see the reason I'm concerned about this, because it also implicates the guardrails. So, as you talked about in your state, there's a lot of gridlock, right? There are a lot of various moving parts. When you're trying to get something done at the state level, you've got local governments that can impede you. You've got a legislature that can say no to you, right? You've got a bunch of it. You've got a judiciary that will tell you no in certain areas. There was a ruling a couple weeks ago that I strongly agree with from the judiciary with regard to, for example, school districts and what they can and should tell parents about their kids.
That's going to be thrown out, but we'll get to that Benitez decision. Yeah.
But when it comes to what President Trump is or is not trying to do, the problem is when we say that he will try to steal the election. Will the election be stolen? That relies now on an opinion about, for example, the Supreme Court of the United States, or an opinion about the various state legislatures and courts. And so now you're not just implicating what President Trump might try to do, you're now implicating pretty much every major institution that is electoral in nature in the
Well,
country.
there's a lot of evidence, and I know both sides have argued a lot of evidence as it relates to the weaponization of justice and the bias that's expressed in a lot of these federal judicial opinions. And it's it's a little alarming. I mean, as a father of a judge who reveres the courts, and as someone that I was very proud. My father may have been accused of being an activist judge, but I many occasions call in balls and strikes, and I revere that sense of justice. That's where justice is found, with an objective analysis. But no, I do worry about the Supreme Court. You may not. I'm concerned about the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm concerned about what Donald Trump did after January 6th, the degree that he went to ultimately try to stay in office. Yes, I'm concerned about the actions he's taken, not any one of them from the midterm redistricting, but the sum total of many of them. And yes, I'm concerned if we don't take back the House of Representatives and we have no oversight and we continue to have the supine Congress, we may not have a country that we recognize. I really believe that. I do.
And it's fine to believe all of those things. I will say that to articulate them as though they are all of equal levels of alarm, or that the sum total of them is that if we don't win the next election, the country's over, which again is something that you hear very often from the right too. I think that sort of alarmism is quite bad for American politics, and I don't think that anyone who's
if we don't win the next election. I mean, the thing about it is, if Gavin Newsom wins the 2028 presidency, nothing will change. We need somebody different from Newsom or Harris.
in electoral politics actually believes that, because I promise you that if a Republican wins in 2028, a Democrat will then run in 2032. And if the reverse is true, the same thing will happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. Look, I do. I just the level.
And I think the American people should know that, because it gives them a sense, okay, I didn't win this time, but I might win next time. And once the American people start to believe they can never win, or their side is always cut out,
Ben, I
that's
love what
when
you're
things
saying.
start to get
The spirit of what you're saying. What you're saying, I completely concur with. I have a different level of anxiety based upon my own direct experience, not just direct experience with Donald Trump. My concern about the rule of law, this notion of co-equal branch government. In your book, you talk about sort of the fundamental Judeo-Christian values in this country, of the best of Greek democracy. I worry about those principles of our
I
founding
worry about
fathers.
checks and balances too.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think that the best way to do that, actually, and this would benefit you as governor of the state, is devolution of more authority back down to the states, devolution of more governmental authority back down to the local levels.
Then why are you supporting Trump's more aggressive federal control, Ben?
Checks and balances of the
Your
federal
lips to God in the White House's ears. I'm a little.
And I hope you remember that. If
Well,
it becomes
this notion of federalism and 10th Amendment. Yeah, I remember. The red states were arguing for
I'm
that
still in
during those
Great
Obama
Britain,
years. God bless you. No, back to your being more consistent, and I respect that, and that's why we're here. And I respect you, and I appreciate this opportunity to engage.
You should not
Obviously,
respect
we have
Ben Shapiro, by the way.
on a lot of these issues, maybe not fundamental, just disagreements on a lot of these issues.
And framing these as disagreements and not like morally culpable end of civilization disagreements is insane behavior.
Back to some of the disagreements, and I don't want to
Sane-washing Republicans.
because as a Democrat, it's in my interest to do so. But you got a lot of attention for going recently to America Fest, Turning Point USA. You
believe in personalizing these things. I was asked by somebody, would Tucker and I ever be friends? I said, I'd go fishing with Tucker. I mean, I don't care. I mean, that doesn't matter to me. The question is his principles and the things that he's.
There we go. This is what I want to get to.
Donald Trump, and forgive me, this is, we're zigging and zagging around a little bit, but I still can't get over the fact that he sat down and had dinner with Nick Fuentes.
So I think that was a bad thing to do, obviously. I think that Nick Fuentes is a scumbag. I think that the president has, an unfortunate.
And also, Ben Shapiro fucking hates modern Republicans. Because like Nick Fuentes and like neo-Nazis are like literally everywhere in there, and he fucking hates it because he has to support it.
To make nice with people who want to make nice with him. He did come out this week, by the way, and in the New York Times said the Republican Party wants nothing to do with people like Nick Fuentes, doesn't want to do with anti-Semites. I'll continue to be critical of Republicans who flirt with this sort of stuff. I wish that the Democratic Party were as critical of sitting Congress members who not only flirt with this sort of stuff, but overtly traffic in this sort of stuff. I mean, I'll ask you about Zohran Mamdani. Zohran Mamdani, literally in the campaign, he was asked on Fox News about Hamas, and he refused to announce it as a terrorist group.
They are a terrorist group, and they should have been announced. I was there, as you know, a few weeks after. October 7th, met with Bibi. Not a big fan of Bibi. This is where we have fundamental disagreements. Quite the contrary, in fact.
But staying on domestic politics for a second, it seems to have become a sort of de rigueur.
If you don't condemn Hamas, you're evil. I don't know why we're still doing this. Like, why haven't we said in the return response, why are you not condemning the genocide of Israel?
Requirement for Democrats who are running for office to now suggest, for example, Scott Wiener just did this, he's running for Congress, that Israel committed a genocide in Gaza. That is, forget about anti-Semitism and discussions of it, because I think that those have become really loose and people don't have a consistent definition of anti-Semitism. Let's just talk about what's true.
That's true. I think it's true about the definition. I mean, we, as you know, have been struggling with that in California as it relates to a lot of laws and legislation.
Of course, anti-Semitism is a fundamentally different cat than, for example, racism. It's basically a conspiracy theory about Jewish power in the world.
And it makes me sick to my stomach, and I say that clearly. And but not just, of course. I mean, we've tried to lead in terms of our response, and we've called out and called balls and strikes in terms of the outrageous things that have happened.
I would, in my own framework of anti-Semitism, I think that saying overtly false things about the Jewish state is a form of anti-Semitism, but I don't think that is really important as much as it is is it true or not? So Democrats have now been dragged into this conversation. Some dragged, some run with flags waving into the conversation.
This notion of genocide.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, look,
Israel did not commit a genocide in Gaza.
Let's see what Newsom's response is. Will Newsom actually call Ben Shapiro out for lying here?
There's no standard by which Israel committed a genocide in Gaza, just on a factual level.
The global, governance and consensus is Israel committed genocide in Gaza, and is
legal and factual level.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is your opinion of this?
My opinion is, I understand the tendency for people to make that, to assert that.
Why?
On the basis of the images and the proportionality as it relates to
genocide.
No. And by the way, I agree with you.
And international.
I'm not.
Wow! Holy shit!
And proportionality doesn't mean that if you kill my child and I then kill 7 criminals, that I've been disproportionate.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think but I understand that tendency on the basis of trying to reconcile the proportionate nature of how the war was ultimately conducted.
I have a question. Why do you feel the need to create a permission structure for that sort of stuff? I mean, meaning it's not true. Yeah. Why not just say it's not true?
Yeah, look, I don't know the definition. I don't know the legal threshold. That's not my opinion, so I don't share that opinion as it relates to genocide. I do not agree with that notion. But you do
understand that if you accuse Israel of committing a genocide, that now puts Israel in the position of it should be a pariah state, because states that commit genocide should be pariah states. Yeah. So granting legitimacy to that position inherently.
I'm not granting legitimacy. I'm just saying the devastation in Gaza at the human level. You've got 4 kids.
Of course, it's terrible.
No, but I think it's also important to absorb that a little bit more. Just as it was sick, and we were clear in our condemnation, these people like me, as it relates to what Hamas did in that act of barbarism and terrorism.
Yeah, there's a difference between deliberate terrorism and wartime collateral damage, of course. And if we refuse to acknowledge that reality, then we end up creating
collateral damage. I have stronger opinions. It wasn't just collateral.
Really, you think that Israel was targeting civilians?
I think some of the double tapping issues. I have a lot of issues with how BB.
So we're not going to say yes, Israel Oh, I don't know. This is what gives Trump so much power and neo-Nazis so much power, is that Democrats and people like Ben Shapiro will not call out Israel for genocide, directly. He's being completely fucking pathetic here.
Ultimately conduct the war. I personally do. And I have a lot of issues that are also painted on the basis of the conversation I had with a few weeks later after.
Because still we pledge fealty to the state of Israel.
He kept talking about the Palestinians. I kept coming back to Hamas, and then ultimately how the war was conducted. Not saying it was a genocide. I'm not. But I have issues.
What is the thing that he said that you particularly?
There was a dehumanization. I didn't like the way he talked about the Palestinian people. I just didn't.
What is the specific?
They can't govern. I didn't. I don't want to get into the details.
The reason I'm asking is because when you suggest that he is conflating Hamas and the Palestinians,
he wasn't conflating.
It does lead to the conclusion.
They were different. It wasn't. No. It was. I'm just saying the way he ultimately conducted it. I look back at that conversation. I reflect on that conversation. It doesn't surprise me. And I did not think it was proportionate.
Okay.
And I thought it was overwhelming, and the devastation and destruction. Breaks my heart.
Okay, so you're president of the United States. Somebody invades from Mexico. They take several thousand American citizens.
I get it. And by the way,
they hold them all the way until the end of the war. Until the end of the war, their hostages being held.
Don't get me wrong on any of this. I'm with you in terms of the ultimate accountability and bringing the hostages home. I like the clarity and conviction as it relates to getting all the hostages dead and alive home, and all of that. I'm not denying that.
And by the way, Hamas still has not been extirpated in the areas where Israel has left them alone.
And clearly this.
By the way, Hamas does not exist anymore. Genuinely, Hamas does not exist as a thought-through organization.
Truce.
Israel got rid of Hamas years ago.
Because Hamas was supposed to be disarmed.
Yeah. Look, there's no. I'm crystal clear about Hamas.
But the point is that
crystal clear about Hamas.
But the point is that I think,
and I'm also crystal clear in my love for Israel and my condemnation of Bibi. And there's a distinction. I condemn Donald Trump. I love my country, and I think that's
listen,
love for Israel, condemnation of Bibi.
I will point out that.
But they're not anti-Semitic when they say.
Of course not.
That's also important to say, because some people conflate that. You don't.
No,
but others do.
I critique Bibi myself.
Ben Shapiro absolutely conflates them.
God bless you.
But when it comes to when it comes to the I mean, we can get into perceptions of Netanyahu's leadership and all this. I will say this. I know every major politician in Israel, I know many major politicians in Ukraine, in Hungary, in a wide variety of places. In Israel, I happen to know the last several prime ministers. If anyone outside of the state of Israel believes that Naftali Bennett or Yair Lapid, who's on the left,
would have
conducted
their response.
That is nuts.
Yeah.
That's nuts. It's not true.
No, fair point. Look, hey.
And the IDF, by the way, operates largely independently in some ways of the prime minister's office. It's kind of a strange dual system that they have over there.
I
know too many soldiers who, I talk about one in the book who had 3 limbs blown off going door to door in Gaza, not using overwhelming air power to eviscerate millions of people.
I was in the hospital meeting victims on October 7th in Israel. So I and been to memorials and
I want to be clear in the terminology we use about all this stuff, because right now, for example,
but the genocide issues.
That's not, it's not true.
No, fair point. Look,
what did Newsom say there?
The IDF, by the way, operates largely independently in some ways of the prime minister's office. It's kind of a strange dual system that they have over there. I know too many soldiers who, I talk about one in the book who had 3 limbs blown off going door to door in Gaza, not using overwhelming air power to eviscerate millions of people.
I was in the hospital meeting victims on October 7th.
Yeah, of course you were.
So
we got the condemn Hamas. We got to say October 7th was a tragedy and not call Israel a genociding state.
Into memorials and
I want to be clear in the terminology we use about all this stuff, because right now, for example,
but the genocide issues.
Where are
okay.
the Democratic Party?
I thought he said it was a genocide.
For the protesters in Iran who are getting mowed down, maybe by the tens of thousands this week.
Well, I know where I am. I put out a pretty clear statement this week, and
I'd like to see more Democrats.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And by the way, I thought it was the right thing to do, that strike, and I thought it was unbelievably effective and efficient. Had no problem saying that.
We're just believing the strike in Iran, which caused the economic collapse of the country, which has now led to this violence, and then also leads to the U.S. wanting to step in and take over the country. So good thing on Gavin Newsom's term.
For the outcome. So I marched to a beat of a little bit of a different drum, a little bit more nuance here. But there is everything's so black and white. There's nuance here. I mean,
for sure. But I think the point that I'm making, get back to sort of where we originally departed here, was that I'm trying to call out what I see as bad behavior, untrue, immoral behavior on my own side. I'd like to see that more from a Democratic Party that seemed to be perfectly willing to wrap an arm around Zohran Mamdani the minute he got a little bit of momentum. The same man who had said that whenever the NYPD boot is on the throat of Americans, the IDF is lacing the boot. That sort of nonsense is terrible.
No, I don't associate with those comments at all. I mean, and look, he doesn't speak for me.
Should Mamdani be the mayor of New York?
That's up for people in New York to make that decision. That's not for me to out here in California, thousands of miles away.
You don't believe Trump should be president? The American people decided he should.
Well, that directly impacts me. I mean, New York may indirectly, but I mean, it's a little bit of a different question. We'll see how he ultimately does. I thought he ran an incredibly effective campaign. I think there's a lot of interesting attributes that he has. Incredibly bright.
But we will never endorse him.
Incredibly capable. He's delivered some.
There are a lot of terrible people who say bright and capable.
No, I get it, but and I absolutely disagree with him on a lot of those comments. And I also maintained that posture pretty consistently over a long period of time. And no, I was not a Cuomo fan. So just for the record, and issues, and they are tough issues. And I appreciate your willingness to call balls and strikes. And a lot of folks, frankly, a lot of folks in your world, as we sort of castigate the right-wing media ecosystem, your willingness to call this stuff out. And
I think that in general, this is the way, if we want to have a way forward in America, and wherever them, I would condemn them. My company was the only company in America, I believe, that on a media level refused to use preferred pronouns for anyone. We use only biological pronouns since 2015, since we launched the company.
No, and I say that because it's just not well known, but the Trump administration's policies allowed for gender assignment, gender affirming care, a bit of hormone treatment,
I think that's
changed operations. It was federal policy.
Listen, I think that's wrong, and I wish that, frankly, you would go further. You've talked about the unfairness in sports, but to me, the bigger question is not unfairness in sports. The bigger question is whether we should be allowing the administration of chemical or surgical mutilation of minors based on gender dysphoria.
Well, the Trump administration has strong opinions. They've sued states like California, many other states, 20 plus states.
So, yes.
And my position is that's between the physician, it's between the family member, and these patients themselves.
Why? Are there any surgical or chemical interventions that you would oppose, even if the patients?
Here we go. I know exactly where this debate goes.
Right, but I'm asking. It's a real question because it does have public policy implications. Meaning, in the state of California, there's a judicial ruling. We referenced it earlier. That said,
well, that's different. That judicial ruling was ridiculous on this basis. Any teacher, and what you're talking about is a law that I signed as it relates to this idea that you can fire someone for not telling on a child in saying that they're talking about being gay, not just trans issues, any LGBTQ issues, that you can be fired. There's nothing in the law. The law that I signed does not preclude these teachers from telling the parents.
No, preclude school districts from
mandating and firing someone for not. But it allows the teacher to make that judgment on the basis of seeing someone that's being bullied and the requirements they have under the law to keep people safe.
As a parent, don't you believe that a teacher should facilitate the passage of information to you? Why would that?
No, absolutely not.
They should somehow just be listening.
The teacher's going to call you.
If it's about safety, the law is pretty clear, and the teachers have that ability, and the teachers maintain that ability. We didn't deny that. We didn't say to the teachers, you cannot.
No,
Quite the contrary. This is critical
No, but
because there's been a lot of
no,
misinformation about this.
I'm not.
And
I'm
I
not
appreciate you
misinterpreting the law.
recognizing
I mean, the school,
Yeah.
what the
But
law
I'm just
did
saying
is it
you
prohibited school
shouldn't
districts.
fire someone. And in many cases, look, anyone that's members of the LGBTQ community, how many stories that you've heard of people that say, I went to my parents with my teacher. That was a safe place for me in school. There's a lot of grace in this space. There's a lot of testimony in this space that I think should just provide a little bit of grace and humility. It's not a black and white issue. Teachers can still, quote unquote, turn in a child. They just can't be fired.
I mean, but my question on that, and again, this is a subset of a broader issue, is why does the parent not have an absolute moral ability to receive that information? And why is there not a requirement? There should be a requirement for teachers to turn over that information.
Because
Health and
children get
safety- Health and
abused.
safety
Our
is a
parents are.
requirement.
If a teacher truly believes that a parent is a threat to a child, they can report it to child services.
Yeah, so health and safety is still the standard. So you maintain that standard. That standard is the law.
That's a lot of wiggle room for a teacher to apply.
Well,
to a
it's
parent.
also, but it's a lot of law in terms of the weight of that law and the response.
I don't like the right view of parents should have complete authority over their children as like ownership and property is always going to be a persistent issue when it comes to queer rights until we call them out for being evil, pathetic. And it starts, I mean, that's why you see so many like right wingers have like child marriages constantly. Like they don't see them as like people, but as like tools to see what they can do with.
Responsibility to take care of make sure your kids are safe. But this idea that Trump says people are going to public schools and coming back, having surgeries and coming back the next day is absurd.
No, but there are certainly cases in which kids are being quote unquote socially transitioned at school without parents knowing about it. I know some of the parents to whom this has happened. I mean, this is the fundamental question that lies at the root of all of this is the question that you're not wanting to answer, which is whether boys can become girls.
Yeah, I think for the grace of God. Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate the sympathy. I also feel terrible for listen, anybody who's suffering with any sort of.
I mean, I think it's been the case for
terrible,
generations, for time immemorial. God bless. I don't know how.
It's a hard one. I just don't understand
because I don't know why it's such a. Why is it such a? I'm curious. I understand the political potency of it.
It's not just politically potent,
but it's just how it's so few. We're talking about so few people.
It's not about the.
Oh, okay, that's
struggling with gender identity issues. A lot of remarkable people, a lot of wildly successful people, and they've gone in their life, have incredible lives. I don't know. There's so much hate and bigotry, so much condemnation, so much.
This is the part where I start to object.
Yeah.
Okay. This is better than a lot of right-leaning Democrats, honestly. I'll give him credit on that, like pointing out that it's such a small proportion of the population. But he also should say just like yes, like trans people are allowed to live their lives.
Not be spewing it.
No.
Like some others. Trust me.
But
this is the business they're in.
There are lots of terrible people who say lots of terrible things, but
yes.
It is not an act of bigotry to say that a boy cannot become a girl, nor should my children be taught in K through 12 public schools that a boy can become a girl.
Yeah.
That is not an act of bigotry. That's an act of rationality and biological simplicity.
I respect your point of view, and
and then we rationalize and whitewash genocidal rhetoric.
The people. Good people disagree on this.
I know, but
in a lot of states, not just California, well-established rules, by the way, that predate me. Again, this is not where I started. We're campaigning and advocating on these issues, as some suggest. And look, I'm with the Governor Spencer Cox, who said about many of these issues, never so much attention been placed on so few people.
The problem is, I do think that on an electoral level, to go to the politics, it is a barrier to entry for a lot of people. When
I agree with that.
When you say a boy can become a girl, and then just on a realistic.
And by the way, and I respect if that's your barrier to then listening to people on myriad of other issues. So be it. It is what it is.
I find it strange that even if you wish to have a public policy that pursues something different, we cannot just admit that boys and girls are two different things and that a boy cannot become a girl. Why is this so difficult?
Yeah, I understand your point of view, and I also respect Caitlyn Jenner. I do.
It's not about respect for individuals.
Well, no,
I'll tell you a story.
By the way,
I was speaking at university.
And this is a harder thing for me too. As you may know, and you probably do. I have a trans godson. There's a little more. I find the humanity. I find different aspects of this at different layers.
This goes back to my sort of truth.
But I know you're facts over empathy.
Well, here's the story. So I was speaking at University of
Facts over empathy is a good line from him, and I'm honestly shocked that Shapiro didn't say, "Well, it's not facts over empathy."
Columbia. This must have been now 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And a person who identified as trans got up at the microphone. And obviously, I do a lot of these things on campus. I used to do more of them. And this issue came up. The person started talking about his family's biological male. Again, you can use whatever pronouns you choose to use. It's a free country. Yeah. But you can't force me to use pronouns that I believe are grammatically incorrect.
Anyway. By the way,
then I should be able to rock your shit.
I'm not sitting here, trying to browbeat you on pronouns. Okay.
So this person gets up and starts talking about his family and how they treat him. And I said, I'd really appreciate if we're going to have a conversation on sort of a general and philosophical level about this issue, if you didn't invoke your family, because I don't want to be in a position of having to talk to you about what your family thinks or believes. And the person continued to invoke their family. Said, well, my family keeps saying that I am a woman, that I'm a woman. And finally, after about 7-8 minutes of this. I said, listen, you've now forced me to the corner where I have to give my opinion. My opinion is that your family is treating you with sympathy, but they don't actually believe that you're a woman, because they care about you and they love you, but they will fib to you because they believe that it is better for you, or that you will not hurt yourself if you say this thing that is not true. The person got very upset, rushed out of the room. Now, normally that's the kind of thing that ends up online as a destroys video kind of thing. I went to the people who were in charge of the event. I had them cut it from the tape because I was worried about the person's mental health status.
I appreciate that.
I called up a person who I knew who knew the person because they'd mentioned it to me, and I actually had breakfast with the person the next morning to make sure that he was okay.
Good for you.
My only point here is not what a wonderful person I am. It's that sympathy does not preclude truth telling, and when you're making public policy, it is very important that sympathy not preclude truth telling.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, it's not just the
And this is the thing, like Ben Shapiro and other right wingers will be chill with trans people in private, and then because I know like Tucker Carlson especially is like talked and had trans friends. They'll be chill with them in private, but then in public, like condemn them and call them evil and say that they're preying on children.
If the idea is that I have to protect my friends and I have to attack my enemies in politics, things get really squirrely really quickly because, again, public policy is for everyone. It is not just for subgroups.
Yeah, I hear you. We just see the world with a different set of eyes on this. I appreciate your sort of intellectual argument and the sort of soundness and the firmness in that space. I can't help but unpack the relationship to families and people and lives lived and the grace and people's lives that are lost and people that are struggling and going through this. I just that's how and to me that does shape the way I make policy, because it's not just science, it's art, it's lived experience, it's reality. And it goes back to the sanctuary thing. There's certain lived realities, and one has to sort of deal with the cards that are dealt, as imperfect as things are, and life is.
And as you know.
But you're one of these. That's why you got the 180 IQ. What was it?
No, I do not.
All right.
It's higher than 180. Yeah.
Jesus, I mean, you can read your book to learn more. By the way, when I was listening, reading Lions and Scavengers, this notion of victimization and envy, the scavenger mindset.
Yes.
I thought you were writing about Donald Trump.
Well, listen, when I was on with Ezra said, it feels like you're talking about a lot of people on both sides. And I said, that is true. I am talking about a lot of people on both sides. I think that, one of the points I make in the book, is that the model of Lions and Scavengers, it's really about kind of people who build versus people who wish to destroy. And the point that I make is that's actually an internal battle inside of all of us. If you go back to the book of Genesis and the story of Cain and Abel, it's a fascinating story, obviously, for a variety of reasons, which is why it's lasted for several thousand years. But what happens is that Cain actually initiates the idea of let's give sacrifices to God, and then God takes Abel's sacrifice, but not Cain's, and doesn't say in the Bible why that is. That's just what happens. And Cain gets angry, and God actually goes to Cain and he says, "Listen, you have the ability to fix yourself, right? Sin crouches at your door." But, and the word in Hebrew is timshal, you can overcome that. You have the capacity to overcome that. And so in every human heart is the capacity to be the person who builds, makes things stronger, makes if you're a politician, better policy, makes the country stronger in terms of its social fabric, or the person who's going to grift, or the person who's going to engage in conspiracy theories, or the person who's going to tear things down because they're unhappy with their life and therefore have decided, falsely, with no evidence, that the system is to blame for all that. I see politicians who do both of those things. I think that sometimes I look at what President Trump says, and I think, that's a real lion thing to do. I think that sending the B-2s to Florida was a lion thing to do. I think that grabbing Maduro was a lion thing, and then sometimes he says things, and I'm like, that is a scavenger thing to do. So this week, for example, he's doing some populist things on economics that probably some members of the left would agree with.
10% caps on credit cards.
I think that's silly. I think that is again externalizing people's debt problem to a place that does not solve the problem, and in fact is more likely to lead to people not being able to get credit cards, because obviously if you
sound like the head of.
And I mean, Shapiro's technically right on this. Like, it'll make the problem worse with that cap on credit cards if that goes through, which I doubt it will. But the solution to Ben Shapiro's mind is take all government regulation out of credit cards and continue the debt problem. This entire podcast is just whitewashing and sane-washing the right and Ben Shapiro specifically. There's been no condemnation of Ben Shapiro's true beliefs, no actual attack on Ben Shapiro and his beliefs that on gender identity, on economic policies, it feels like they're agreeing quite a bit, and so it makes Ben Shapiro and people on the right in turn not seem as insane as Donald Trump, but they are all part of the same apparatus. Ben Shapiro's not happy with the anti-Semitism, but he 100% supports Donald Trump. Never get that wrong. Ben Shapiro will never change that opinion. If someone else on the right comes out, or a fascist-leaning person comes out on the left, or capital interest person like Newsom comes out on the left and goes for president, Ben Shapiro would support certain policies of them. But then if Newsom actually won and somebody on the right came out as a fascist-leaning, not neo-Nazi, but fascist-leaning person, Shapiro would swap to them in an instant and lie about everything else he said in the past. He will say one thing, next week say something different, and lie that he said the initial thing. And Newsom will not call him out for that. It is sane-washing the right. They did the same thing in Harris's election campaign. And it's just completely fucking pathetic.
JP Morgan, what about rolling up all the corporate purchases of private single-family homes?
I think that is a ridiculous.
Which doesn't happen, by the way. Corporate purchase private single-family homes makes up like 2% of the market at most. We need apartment complexes to be part of the government.
Misdirect. Okay, the fact is that in the state of California, for example, exorbitantly low percentage.
Relative to other states.
Relative to other states for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and guess what? Real estate here, really, really expensive. And meanwhile, if you go over to Charlotte, North Carolina, where the real estate prices actually have been diving, you actually do have pretty significant corporate ownership. And here we're talking about large corporations, not like small mom and pop operations where you own a second home to rent it out. Now, typically speaking, when a corporation invests in an area like say Phoenix and then builds up an enormous number of rental units, because that's what happens. They buy, let's say, a single family home, now they rent it out. Okay, so they just increase the stock of rent. Right, which means that the rental prices go down. Yep. And then corporations typically are investing in areas where it's easier to buy and easier to renovate and easier to build. Like renovating is very difficult in places like New York and in certain parts of California. It's a lot easier in say Austin or Phoenix or Florida. And so what you've seen is actually there's not only zero correlation between corporate ownership of real estate assets and price of rent, for example. In many cases, there's a reverse correlation. And so trying to refocus on, look at this terrible, it isn't BlackRock. BlackRock doesn't own real estate assets in this fashion. But if you're looking at Blackstone, right, and then it's Blackstone's fault that the real estate prices are going up. No, it isn't. And again, I think that
so is... So why is he pursuing two policies that you vehemently disagree with?
Because I think that it is
flailing on the issue of the economy with the American people?
Governor, I think that it is politically beneficial for politicians to tell people that their problems are easily solvable with the stroke of a pen and by blaming somebody who's richer than they are. I think that is a very easy way to get away.
I mean, it could be solved with the stroke of the pen, and it is at the fault of the richer people. Absolutely pathetic from the Democrats. And honestly, Gavin Newsom. I don't know what I want to do. Like, Gavin Newsom completely cucked out at Ben Shapiro here. Dude, I saw this, completely fucking shocked. But then I wasn't surprised by the rhetoric that Gavin Newsom, like, he seemed very cordial, seemed very respectful, and you should not. They are evil people, and they do not have your best interests at heart, and they want you to suffer. Oh my fucking god. I don't know. Probably... I mean, I'll vote in local elections no matter what in 2028, but I don't know about the presidential election. I do not know about the presidential election. If it ends up being Newsom and he wins, like, nothing's going to change. In 4 years, then we'll have fascism too.